So it'd be ridiculous of me to pretend that I haven't changed, because I've changed my career path about 83 times. But the very basis of everything comes from, if it interests me, it will probably interest another group of people. Sometimes it's 1,000, sometimes it's millions. That's the thing I don't think I've ever been very good at chasing. I'm sure other people are. But for me, yeah, it's just about the story.
Hello and welcome to Outlines, a podcast about sport, stories and the media. I'm Eoin Connolly, hope you're well. Great to have you with us, whether you're new to the pod or returning for another listen. Welcome back, if so. This should be a good one. Something that's been really fun about this project already is getting to talk to people who've found their own way sort of into this world of sport and storytelling and maybe reshaped it a little once they've got there. And that is absolutely true of our guest today. Jarrod Kimber is a well-travelled and very well-regarded cricket writer, podcaster, broadcaster and filmmaker. After starting out as a blogger in the late 2000s, he's worked far and wide across places like ESPN Cricinfo and The Cricketer and Wisden and The Independent and TalkSport and plenty of others. He's even served as an analyst both for the media and for professional teams. He's an Australian, but was one of the first people in cricket media to really explore the boundaries, so to speak, of a globalising game as it reached less familiar territories. And he's since embraced the possibilities not just of tools like analytics, but also different audio and video formats and newsletters and live streams as he's built his own media brand, Good Areas, over the last few years. And he's written several books, the latest of which, The Art of Batting, came out to some great reviews earlier this summer. Jarrod is very much someone who's developed his own method with a distinctive approach to finding stories and to telling them. And he's very thoughtful and often forthright on the wider dynamics of cricket media in a sport that's changed really quickly over the course of his career so far. Plenty to get your teeth into. Cricket is a game that's very close to my heart. It may not be to yours, but I hope there's value in here either way. We talk about the specific role that culture plays in cricket, a few of the gaps that maybe exist in its literary history, the opportunities that have opened up in the T20 era, and some of Jarrod's other influences as well. Quick note to say, if you are enjoying Outlines, then please do subscribe, rate and review, share links, and just generally let people know about it. But before you do that, let's hear from Jarrod Kimber. I'm trying not to be too time sensitive here with some of these questions, but how did you find the WTC final?
No, it was great. I mean, Australia just wins so much. And so an Australian win wouldn't have really moved any sort of needle. Like, I think when Australia won the last World Test Championship, I think I wrote something along the lines of Australia win another trophy or Australia win another silver thing or something. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or golden thing, whatever it was.
Yeah, sure.
And it's like, at a certain point, they don't really change anything. So like, and I'm an Australian who has lived long enough to see us win lots of things. So most Australian fans weren't paying any attention. The people who were paying attention were South Africa. So from a narrative point of view, from a structural point of view, from a enjoyable point of view, it was great that the team who needed to win something won something, and the other team wasn't paying all that much attention. And so, that's how it goes.
You'll forgive me for saying that's a very Australian way of sounding magnanimous.
Well, I mean, I think you have to understand with Australia, that's kind of how it works. Like, if this was a World Test Championship in Melbourne and they'd lost it right in the middle of summer, it would be honestly straight away. There would be is Australian cricket over? Does Pat Cummins need to be fired? Why can't we find any batters? Whatever. Whereas this one was like, maybe they got the best of the toss and the pitch conditions, and that's why we lost. Like, that was literally all it was. Like, if it doesn't happen right in front of Australian fans, they kind of move on. So they've just won enough. Like, so there's nothing left to say. It's most of my professional career has been covering Australian men or women's team win, right? So the thing that I'd never seen was the South Africans win. So for me, that was a much better story. And I got messages from people back home saying the same thing. People who grew up hating South Africa who were like, this is actually kind of nice, isn't it? Right. and so I think in this case, it wasn't as big a deal. If Australia had never won a World Test Championship, I think it would have been different. But the fact that they've won everything, right? So to them, it just didn't matter in a way that it clearly did to South Africans and South African cricket culture.
Yeah. If it had been England overnight in Australia, would that have been a slightly different story, or would there still have been?
I mean, Australia stuffed up 2 Ashes in a row in England, where they probably should have won both of them and ended up with draws. And there wasn't a lot of like, oh no, is this the end of Australian cricket? Whereas, when they lost to India, it was like, we might need to start from scratch, because they lost to India in front of everyone. Australia is such a weird cricket culture. It doesn't work like other cricket cultures. For 2 months of the year, it's the world's biggest sport. And then for the other 10 months of the year, the footy's on, right? Yeah. So it really matters where it is at the right time. So you can beat Australia and Australians don't care that much, or you can beat Australia and it matters more than it's ever mattered to Australians ever before. So it's a different kind of sport, the way that it works over there. And so you kind of have to accept that. I mean, I think Australians don't really like, South African cricket culture, because they find it kind of boring and repetitive and defensive. And during the 90s, we were told their team was as good as ours. And so we kind of resent them. So I think there was plenty of reasons to moan about this South African team. And yet most people just went, oh, well, they won one. We'll win the next one.
Yeah. Is that purely geography or time zones, or what is it about that aspect? Or is it that Australia is such a distinctive
footy season?
Yeah. Just doesn't get
It's footy season.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you've got 2 different major football codes. So the North is doing rugby league, the South is doing Aussie rules. There's a little bit of rugby union there as well, but it's the middle of winter. It's never, cricket's been always been a weird sport in Australia, in that it is massively important culturally and incredibly important during the summer, but it doesn't really live very well outside the summer. It never has. Even in a city like Melbourne, where we'll go to any sporting event, I remember going to the ODIs when they were played at the Docklands undercover, and it was like, no one really got into them, because it was like, this is the wrong time to be playing cricket, and that's not as much how other cricket culture. There are some cricket cultures who follow that bit a little bit, but yeah, it's certainly a big part of how the game has gone ahead in Australia. Yeah. So it is, I think cricket is just different in Australia for many different reasons. It's probably the only place on earth where cricket is a game for everyone, rather than for middle class and above. And it's probably one of the only other places where cricket is played as a team sport rather than as a sport of team, but individual. Yeah. Individuals running it. So Australian cricket just developed in this weird way that I could never fully understand, honestly. And it's, and it is part of the reason why they are what they are. And we are what we are.
Yeah. How's your perspective on that changed? Because you've been primarily, obviously as a, cricket journalist and analyst, you toured a lot, and as a lot of people in that world do, you don't really have the same kind of stable base that lots of people do, because cricket tours are historically so long and so far flung from each other. But you've been based in the UK, as I understand it, for quite a chunk of time as well. I mean, how's that changed your perspective on Australian cricket culture, and also just how different cricket cultures are and how they develop and where they're similar and where they're different?
Yeah, I mean, being a cricket writer, you can't really talk about cricket teams without understanding culture, in a way that probably football is the only other sport that compares. And quite often, if you look at cricket, the national team is rising at the same time the country is rising, which isn't always the case in football again. So it's even separate to that. Then, you've got the understanding between the colonies, and the imperial side of things. So I think it's very hard. I mean, to be fair, some cricket writers do manage to ignore all this, but yeah, I think it's very hard to ignore all that when you're talking about these countries, right? And so it is intertwined in a way. Look, I'm not the most patriotic person. I don't really understand patriotism at all. I think it's kind of nonsensical. A bunch of old English people drew lines around things, and now I have to care about someone who lives 1,000 kilometers away from me more than I do perhaps someone who lives 500 kilometers away from me, but they're on the other side of the border. Like, it just, for me, I don't really understand that. It's not how I process things. I'm just as proud as the suburb I grew up in as I am as being Australian. Like, I think the suburb I grew up in Melbourne, on the outskirts of Melbourne, was as important to who I am as a human being as it being in Australia is, right? And so for me, I don't feel any more pull towards that. But I understand that that's not how cricket is, and there are many people who do feel that way. I was also really lucky. I was the first global cricket writer. There wasn't a global cricket writer before me. There wasn't someone who covered all cricket. Everyone covered individual cricket nations before I came along. And so because of that, you are plugged into all these different matrices around the world, right? You have to understand how Bangladesh becomes Bangladesh. You can't write about Bangladesh cricket without understanding its history with India and Pakistan and England, right? You need to know that information in order to write about it correctly. And so, you know, I don't know, I've been to so many different countries around the world, and you know, in cricket tours, you're there for like a month or 2 months, right? So you soak up the culture whether you want to or not. You can only keep your head in the sand for so long, right? Like, and so I'm naturally curious. I love cities. So I think all those things sort of bled in. And so I look at things very differently than other people do.
Yeah. I mean, we've kind of hinted at it there, but you kind of found your own path into cricket journalism. It's familiar. There's other examples like it across sport of people who've kind of started out as bloggers and worked their way then through more established routes after that. But I mean, you kind of set your own template in cricket writing. I mean, just give us a quick sketch of what that was, and also, you know, a sense of how you think that shaped your approach.
It's funny. I met a guy called John Hollinger recently, who's one of the Athletics major NBA writers, and I think he's brilliant. And I met him at an event, and we were chatting. And I said, when I explain myself to Americans, I say I'm like the Walmart version of John Hollinger, and they understand basically my pathway through that. And then we were chatting, and about 10 minutes into chatting, he was like, "You've done way more than me." And it's like, it's true. Like when I look back on it, I think about it in a sort of very simplistic way. But the best way of explaining it is that I had a film production company in Melbourne, and we had some work, but not enough to sustain us as a business. I started writing a cricket blog. Within about a year, it's the biggest cricket blog probably in existence, but certainly at that period. I end up as the editor of Spin Cricket magazine, which was a prominent cricket magazine back in that period of time. Sadly, it's no longer with us as a magazine. From that, I sort of get options to work with Cricinfo, where I become the senior writer. So that's like ESPN's cricket website with 40 million subscribers. And I somehow went from not being hired to write for them to being their global writer and their main feature writer in about a week, which is very, very weird. But along the way, I've been a commentator for TalkSport. I make documentaries. I've written lots of books. I've been a general manager for cricket teams. I've been an analyst for cricket teams. I've done consultancy for various people throughout cricket for many different projects. So I just had this ridiculous career, which is part based on the fact that I don't like doing the same thing over and over again. Mm-hmm. And also then I think part also based on the fact that my skills are not straightforward. Like I'm very unskilled in a lot of things, but the things I am skillful at sort of overlap and interchange with each other, so that it meant that I have the ability to do all these things that probably other sports writers would love to do, but they're very good at actually being a sports writer. Yeah. And I'm not even good at. I've got a friend called Andrew Fidel Fernando, this brilliant Sri Lankan writer, and he would watch me try and do a press conference, and he'd be like, "You're not actually that talented at these things, are you?" And he's right, right? Like I'm not very good. I can't do shorthand. Like, and I know new generations of journalists are like, well, why would we do that? But when I came through, that was a big deal that I didn't do shorthand, right? I wasn't very good at transcribing interviews. I'm a very quick typer, but I'm not very good at listening to people, it turns out. So I'm not very good at that sort of stuff. But the things I was good at were quite dynamic. So for instance, I can write you a 3,000 word feature in an afternoon that is pretty much more or less well structured. There'll be a few typos, there'll be a few literals and things like that. But narratively and journalism wise, it's going to be quite tight, right? No normal human being can't do that. That's normal sports writers. Like there are sports writers sweating that I've just said that out loud, right? and so I kept chasing the thing that I was interested in, and it just kept changing, and so I kept changing, and so now you look at what I do now, and it's like this combination of podcasting, documentaries, writing, analysis for teams, consultancy with media organizations. Like that's just because I'm interested in lots of different things, and it's kind of all come from cricket, even if writing was probably at the heart of it, not cricket.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like when you put it that way, your role now is more the sort of typical role that a prominent sports journalist might have, where they're expected to be able to appear on a podcast and they're expected to be able to be quite good to camera, and they're expected to have kind of a specialism or a niche or a way into a story or a set of stories that's particular to them, but also is kind of accessible to an audience.
Yeah, and it shows you how much things have changed. Because when I first came in, I remember having a conversation with English newspaper writers going, what are you going to do for us? Because you don't do any of the things that we need you to do, so we can't hire you or whatever. And it's like, now I'm the template that is used in sports journalism stuff, right? Like, where it's like, have a look at what this cricket writer has done with his career, and that's what you should be doing. And it changed that quickly. I remember when we were with ESPN, and I hadn't signed a contract with them, but I'd done a little bit of freelance, and I had this column with them, which was a terrible column, which I hated and I didn't want to do anymore. And while we were there, they paid me to go out and do this thing during an Ashes. While we were there, me and my friend just started filming ourselves and having fun with cricket in a way that hadn't really existed before. The show was called Two Pricks at the Ashes. It was really a forerunner to what you see online now with, the way that sports media works now. But it was not at all in 2010-11, it was not the thing that you were supposed to do.
Yeah.
And the journalists were like, what are you doing? You're selling yourself short. You're a really good writer. You shouldn't be doing this stuff. And within 18 months, all of them were doing to-camera pieces, right? Because we were doing so well with ours that it had kind of changed the cricket industry around us. And within 2 years, everyone in sport was doing it, right?
Yeah.
Like, it just completely took over. And so, again, it's not like I sat there going, we had a bit of an idea that we would get more attention if we didn't just write. I think we counted, and there were 28 writers that were traveling from the UK to Australia for that Ashes. And we're like, well, how do we stand out? And I was pretty sure my writing would be okay, but my friend was like, I'm not sure my writing will be. And I said, well, what if, how do we can we do this thing and whatever? It's not like we sat there with a blueprint going, well, if we do this, we're going to change sports media forever, right? But through all that sort of stuff, and, I was involved with Test Match Sofa, which was like a rebel cricket commentary that didn't pay for the rights and sort of just broadcast internationally on their own. Doing stuff like that, I got paid no money for any of those things, but it allowed me to train and also bring out my natural skills because, I can talk, right? And I can look at cameras and I can do all those sorts of things. Whereas the cricket writers before, they weren't even asked to do any of that. You're a cricket writer. It was hard. It was actually even hard to go from being a cricket writer to being a radio broadcaster when I first started my career. And now most radio broadcasters are sports writers, right? Like, there's such an overlap now in a way that it just wasn't when I was starting out.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing that's changed, you talk about yourself as the first global cricket writer, or that as a title, I guess, as much as anything else. But like, the economics of international cricket have also changed a lot in the last, what are we talking about, the span of your career, about 15 years or so.
17 years. Yeah.
17 years. So, 17 years, that maps almost completely onto the IPL, which is kind of the thing that's changed it the most, because it's globalized certain stories and certain players' careers, but it's also kind of created these quite unusual balances between, well, what's a story that's really interesting to a global audience, which is going to be very heavily weighted towards India because, there's a lot of people there. And then this kind of move at the same time towards kind of a localization or specialization of different types of media in the internet age and kind of niche audiences and all the rest of it. What do you think about how that's changed the way that cricket media tells stories as well?
Yeah, look, we didn't know anything about India when we were growing up, really, as cricket fans. So we've gone from not knowing anything about India to having the ICC chairman in 11 shots of a social media clip that they've put out. Casual fans now know who runs Indian cricket. Like, that's how different the world is now than it was before. To me, nothing's changed, though, because I was a global cricket writer before. It's just that no one else was paying attention. So when those newspaper writers were going, oh, we don't know how to handle you, one of the things was I was writing about all these different cricket teams, whereas they were trained to think about their cricket team and then whoever was touring their cricket team, right? That's not really the case as much anymore. Now you do write for more of a global audience, even when you're a localized newspaper. So the world has changed. I haven't really changed as much. And so from my perspective, nothing has really changed with what stories I look for. I'm just looking for, does this interest me? Can I tell this story?
Yeah.
That's all I've ever looked for. So the IPL was just on, and because of the India-Pakistan war, I was at the England-Zimbabwe test match. And because I've covered England a million times, I just covered Zimbabwe for the week, right? So in the middle of the IPL, this multi-billion-dollar event, right? I'm talking about Brian Bennett, right? And his brother, who's a tobacco farmer, right? That's the best story. That's all it was. I was really interested in it. Someone told me that story and I was like, wait, I need to know more about this. What, tell me about tobacco farms in Zimbabwe. Why is that a thing? And, who gives up a cricket career to be a farmer? Like, take me through the details, right?
Yeah.
For me, that hasn't changed. The difference is we get so much information out of India. I think you'd be silly to say that you wouldn't write about India more if you're in my kind of position, just because it's actually, I have to do so much. Investigative is probably doing a heavy load here, but I have to do a lot of hardcore journalism, right? Like, messaging people to find out stuff about Zimbabwe cricket. Right?
Yeah.
Whereas with India, like you could write a biography on any Indian cricketer based just on the aggregator sites that follow their careers now, right? Like that's how we know everything about these guys. You want to know who sat next to them in maths class? There's like an article here, and here's the podcast that follows the article up. So there's a lot more information that comes out of India. So sometimes you do have to go, is this actually a real story? Or am I only writing about this because I know more about it? But from my perspective, nothing has actually changed. I'm just as interested in the West Indies playing Netherlands as I ever would have been. It's just now I can watch the West Indies play Netherlands, so I'm more likely to write about it. And the IPL is the biggest thing for 2 months in a year. I can't really, if I wouldn't write about it, I would have to shut down everything I do, right? I could take 2 months off, but it doesn't really work with school holidays. So it's a pointless time for me to take them off. So that's the way I look at it. Is this a good story? I very rarely go, is this an Indian story or an England story or an Australian story? I'm just like, is this a good story?
Yeah. And is that an approach you've taken? You've got your own platforms now. You've got your podcasts, plural, I think, and you've got Good Areas, which is a sort of independent media site / newsletter / living in lots of different places venture that you've got going. Is that still the sort of animating principle when you take it to that level, or is it, is there a degree of we have to think about this audience or that audience?
It's so rare that we've ever had a conversation as a group. So we're a small media company. So basically what we do is we come up with a good idea and then we try and work out how that idea will work on YouTube, podcasts, and written, right? Yep. And then social kind of takes care of itself from there. And so quite often my team will be like, we have to do this thing. And we're like, no, we don't. And they get really frustrated with me. And I said, we don't have to do anything. That's the great thing about being story-led, right? We have to do stuff when we want to do it. And even then we might be like, we really want to do this, but we don't have time to be able to do this. So because we're doing these other stories that we like more. Most of the times we've ever tried to pander to an audience, it just hasn't worked.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not going to pretend that there aren't people that don't pander towards the Indian audience or the Pakistani audience. Those are the two that get pandered to quite a lot by Westerners quite often, but sometimes by locals as well. I'm not saying those people they can't work, but I can't do that. And the reason I can't do that is I would get bored. And if I get bored, I'll stop doing the thing. So even if it worked, it wouldn't work. It would work for like a week. So like people will say things, oh, you're doing a big piece on the IPL trades. And I'm like, yes, because I've been a basketball fan my whole life and an Aussie rules football fan my whole life. And they've had trades and cricket's never had trades before. I'm absolutely obsessed with trades. And the IPL is the best league to look at trades because of how bad their trades have been. Right. And so if you want to go back in my history, you'll probably also find pieces I've written about the Big Bash trades and maybe even a PSL or a CPL trade or whatever other trade that I threw in there as well. But you're not noticing that. You're noticing this video because this video has 30,000 views. That other one had 4,000 views because it didn't have the IPL in it. To me, it's no more or less interesting, right? Yeah. And our biggest video is Neil Wagner video. I shouldn't say that. Our biggest success story is a video on Neil Wagner. Neil Wagner is a New Zealand cricketer who comes from South Africa, who is not particularly popular or well-known or anything like that. And that video's had, 300,000 or 400,000 views, right? If I was to pitch that to anyone in sports media, they'd be like, why are you doing a 40-minute documentary on this player, right? There's no way anyone would have commissioned that. And so how do I know how that has become successful? We did another video one stage that was on an obscure it's like an overlap between the playing conditions and the laws of cricket. So the playing conditions are slightly different than the laws of cricket now because of DRS and because of international cricket being different. And there was this like weird flap in the middle that basically meant that sometimes you get what I described as a zombie ball. That video's had like 400,000 views, and it was literally a South Africa island game that the players don't remember playing it, right? Again, you don't know what will be successful. So what I try and do, and what I've always done since I started as a blogger on my own, is the same thing. Am I interested in this?
Yeah.
Is this funny? Does this make me laugh? Does this make me cry? Does this make me want to know more? Can I explain this thing, right? Is this something I'm deeply passionate about? And then I do that. And again, when I first started in the industry, I was like, oh, you're so selfish. You should be thinking about the audience. And I went, look, I don't know who the audience is, right? I know who I am, right? And I know that if I laugh at this, chances are someone else will laugh at it.
Yeah.
And at the time, maybe it was a bit of a risk, but I didn't have any bosses, so I just did it. And so I've had chats with many distinguished media people, like, you always have to think of your audience. And I was like, no, I think of the story, and then I try and make the story as engaging as possible to the audience. And sometimes 1,000 people might watch it, and sometimes 1.5 million people might watch it.
Yeah.
I can't control that part, but I can control whether I want to tell the story or not. And if it's something that I really care about, or that I really like doing, I'm going to do it. So we do a thing called power rankings, right? Which is a real American sports concept of getting past the sort of the points tables and all, and the list, and just going, okay, this team's up here, but if you look, they haven't played anyone good, or this team's up here, but they've had 5 close games. They've won all 5 of them. Eventually, they're going to start losing close games, and so they'll slip down or whatever. I don't do that because I think it'll get views. I do that because it helps me focus on the games better, and it helps me understand the narratives of, actually, this team's been overperforming, and this team's been underperforming, and this team hasn't played away yet, right? And all those sorts of things. And so we put those videos together for that. Right. And then you hope that people like them. They're not like massively popular videos. They're fine. But I love doing them. So we keep doing them.
I guess that keeps you going in the delta between 5,000 and 500,000 views. If you've enjoyed doing it, and you can kind of put that to one side, you can stay kind of phlegmatic about it. What's changed about cricket then as a storytelling environment? Because that, are there more stories to tell, or are there more places to tell them, I guess is the question there. If you take the audience side out of it.
Yeah. So what happened before? So as someone who's done a lot on the history of cricket, you realize how much the history of cricket is just English people talking about other people, right? It's not always imperial nonsense, and it's not always racist or class-based, but that is a part of it. And so when South Africa, well, actually they're a bad example, but when Pakistan played West Indies, there isn't actually that much coverage of it. Do you know what I mean? Like, you have some of the best players in the world being involved, but they're not actually... there's a famous test series where Pakistan play the West Indies, and the world record is broken, and also the world's longest innings. So 2 world records are broken in the space of 2 tests. There's almost nothing written about that series. So what happens now is, we are democratizing information via the internet, but also I can watch a game anywhere, right? I'm not bound by my location and what my host broadcaster will show. And it's the same with storytelling. Like, players now will tweet out about something, or give you a bit of information, and you have the ability to be able to use that in a way that you would not have before. So there are more stories. When I grew up, you could make an argument that there was never more than 45 famous cricketers at one point, right? And now there's something like I think there's something like 4,000 professional cricketers in the world at the moment. And of those 4,000 professional cricketers, there's probably about 150 to 200 that are pretty widely known, right? They're not all famous, but they're pretty widely known.
Yeah.
So we've entered a completely different era, right? When it comes to cricket and storytelling. And then we're adding on Afghanistan and Thailand, Brazil, Nepal, Uganda. These are not even footnotes in cricket history, right? Despite the fact that there is good cricket history in some of these places. The average cricket fan doesn't know that Denmark had a really good side and that they had county players in the 80s, because no one ever thought to write about it all that much, right? It was in a couple of English magazines and then it disappeared. There weren't bigger projects made on it. And so cricket fans don't even know about their own history of their own sport, because if it wasn't considered interesting to an English person, it wasn't covered.
Yeah.
Right. So Basil d'Oliveira, incredibly famous, very well covered because it happened in England with England people involved. Right. There was an Australian cricketer in the 1880s or 1890s who plays for Australia, who's a black man from the West Indies. Not covered because he didn't play for England. So it wasn't thought to be useful to the English audience at that time. So we're just uncovering all these things, not to mention women's cricket. There's, I give you one of my favorite stories about modern women's cricket is that you'll hear this thing over and over again about women invented overarm bowling, right? It's used again and again as a story about, about the sport. It's not true. Women didn't invent overarm bowling. In fact, even the story that we have about overarm bowling, right, comes after the first person had bowled overarm, right? So we know that that's not true. But if you actually do some research into the sport, it's 95% sure that women actually invented the sport of cricket. They were the ones who formalized it and actually made it in milkmaids in Sussex, right? And that's not told, right? So we don't tell our own stories. So what we are getting access to now is this entirely different world, right? Where we have a lot more interesting stories and information available to us. And that's not a cricket thing, right? But cricket was particularly ring-fenced by the English establishment. So what is happening now is you are breaking free of that with new leagues, with new stories, with new countries, with new genders, are being involved in this for the first time. So they're getting their stories told.
Yeah. But at the same time, you have a culture, I guess, that likes to think of itself as a storytelling culture. Everybody has their own, whether you've played or whether there's a game you remember where something unusual happened, or it's obviously a touring culture, so there's always something that's gone awry or somebody who's gone missing or what have you. Do you think those two things have kind of meshed in quite an interesting way?
Cricket's really interesting. I think cricket has this history of being a very literary sport, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't think it was that literary. I think what basically happened was it's the first formalized major international sport, right? So boxing is still is not quite at that level. The Olympics and running and everything are not quite at that level. Cricket is a team-based sport with individual superstars within it, right? Because of international sport, England, it's quite well known in many different parts of the world. And England is known as a literary country. And so I think cricket and there's a lot of books about cricket. Yeah. They are more often than not, sadly, the same stories told over and over again, right? And so if you own like 5 different history books, you will find a bit of an overlap, I think, of the same stories on repeat there. And I'm not saying that other sports don't have this, but because there are so many cricket books and they are so popular, or they have been throughout the history, less so now, I think there's a big element of that these things keep happening again and again and again, right? I think actually the biggest problem that cricket has 2 fundamental problems when it comes to storytelling. The first one is that there's too many newspapers in the UK, and they were all trying to record essentially a very similar story to each other. So all those journalists didn't get fired for missing the story. So they collude on their stories, which is absolutely the worst possible thing you could have for storytelling, right? Everyone writing the same article because, just one writes it in a Guardian style and one writes it in the Sun style. The worst. The other thing that we have in cricket, which has completely ruined cricket writing, is that it's the only sport that forgot to have substitutions. And so by not having substitutions, it means that like 80% of cricket writing is about the fact that another player should have been picked in the side, even though that other player is also probably the 11th best player and would only have changed it a little bit. So what really comes from cricket is that it's much harder to, I think in the old days, it was much harder to write about cricket than it was other sports. If you're writing about boxing, you might be 5 meters from the ring. Yeah. Right? Old cricket writers are 50, 60, 70, 80 meters from the action without any cameras. So I think there was that romance written in. And then the next big technological advance is radio, right? We've now got 7 or 8 hours of cricket on the radio. That's all storytelling. So there are elements of great storytelling within cricket. And it does come out occasionally, but there are also elements of, I think, bad journalism and bad reporting that has been bred into our sport as well. So I think it has a better reputation than it deserves because you had Neville Curtis making shit up, right? Because he couldn't see anything, right? Like, I don't know. Like, he would write from games he wasn't even at, right? Like, he'd just make it up. And so I think there was an element of that. So if you go back even, and that's, you can read about that in the 1700s. Some of the writing about cricket it's so flowery and over the top. It's like, all right, settle down, Shakespeare. Who won the game, right? and then as we have, and it's probably only been the last 20 or 30 years that a normal day-to-day cricket writer has had access to a close-up camera.
Yeah.
Right? That they can watch, and maybe they can even now stream and go on and find replays of and highlights packages. So I think you do get the stories, but I think you got the same stories recycled. And then you had this other bad element of cricket writing that never really went away. But at its heart, cricket is a game of conversations.
Yeah.
Right? Because it takes so long. You can't not have a conversation in a cricket game, right? You know, golf is probably the only other sport that kind of matches it, where you're just like, you've got days and days to fill, whether you be a writer, whether you be a broadcaster, you know, whether you be a fan. If you're sitting at a cricket game with your friend for 2 or 3 days, you're just telling stories to each other, right? Because what else is there after a certain period of time? So cricket has a great story arc within it, but it hasn't always got to those stories as well as what I think it should have for all the different reasons I just mentioned.
Yeah. It's also, I mean, at that point about conversations, one of the teams is mostly not playing half the time.
Yeah.
And, you know, you might have the same 9 guys kind of sitting there, or 9 girls sitting there waiting for one of their teammates to get out before the kind of the seating arrangement changes, which even baseball doesn't quite have because, you know, the turnover is that bit quicker.
No.
So, I mean, you know, just on that point of technology, analytics is another area of real interest for you. And it's another area that you've kind of made a bit of a living out of, you know, even away from media, as you said. What do you think of that as a storytelling tool? And how is it different, the kind of things that people are discovering about cricket and about the kind of intrinsic mechanics of the game, as opposed to stats and averages and all the other ways that people used to talk about it, and, you know, people have got used to talk about it for decades?
Yeah, Ethan Strauss is an American podcaster now, but he was a writer with The Athletic for a while as well. And he saw in America that all these white guys went to analytics, and in his head, he's kind of, I might be slightly misquoting here, but he's like, it was a way of white writers to continue to write about non-white athletes without being called racist, right? Where you actually had the analytics to be able to back you up. And I don't know. I've not been in American sports. I don't know if that's the case. But for me, and I would say for a lot of people who do heavy analysis ourselves, that's not why we do it. I'd say the main reason we do it is we want to know more about the game. And at a certain point, you hit a brick wall just asking questions to former players, right? Like, and watching the game yourself. And so for me, analysis was really just the ability to learn more about what was happening on the field. In some ways, finding out things that even cricketers don't know and being able to feed that back to them, or being able to shake loose another bit of information from them by saying, by the way, I found this out. What do you think of this? And they'll be like, that might happen because of this, this, and this. And I'm going to learn more about the game. Yeah. All I wanted to do is learn more about the game, right? So that is watching the game. That is reading about the game. That is talking to people, press and former players and current players. And that's analytics. They're all just that. Then you come to storytelling and it's like, well, I have this extra information available to me. I think one of my big skills as a storyteller, I think 2 of the things I'm very good at, and as we said before, as Andrew Fidel Fernando has pointed out, I'm very bad at lots of things. But a couple of things that I'm very good at is understanding narrative, right? Like, I get narrative, like, this is the most Australian story ever, but my friend is like the guy who's like the lead writer on Neighbours for like a decade. And he met up with me in a pub once, and we never worked as writers together. When we worked together, we worked in a call center together. We both wanted to be writers, and we went off on our own, became writers, and we're meeting up in a pub as old men together talking about it. And he goes, your understanding of narrative is ridiculous. Like, I'm reading your pieces and it's like they're put together like Hollywood movies, right? Which is probably because that's how I learned how to be a writer. And the other thing that I'm really good at is the ability to explain complex things in an uncomplicated way. Now, part of this is one of my big flaws as a writer, which is I have a terrible vocab. I don't, I'm not very good. I don't have lots of words. I recently got diagnosed with dyslexia, which I don't know if that's part of having a smaller vocab. I don't know, but I don't have the best vocabulary of any person that you, certainly of a professional writer. Mine would be really, really low, comically low. And that has helped me explain things to people, because I'm always constantly trying to explain it in the most clearest and easiest way possible. So when data analysis comes along, I'm like, I'm probably the perfect person. I can use it in storytelling, so I don't look like I'm a dweeb going, I looked at this spreadsheet and I came up with this, right? And then the other side is, I can explain it in a way that, I always say, when I started being, an analyst for cricket teams, you're working with people. I make fun of them so much for this, but you're working with people who mostly the highest level of technology they have is the day that they got their Hotmail account onto their smartphone, right? And so you're trying to explain, regression to the mean and algorithmic based maths and, weightages and all this sort of stuff. And they can't remember how to get into their WhatsApp group, right? They've accidentally locked themselves out. So basically, like, it's the same. It doesn't matter if I'm explaining a topic to someone who doesn't speak English very well, which is a lot of the cricket world, right? English might be their second, third, or fourth language. Or if I'm explaining it to an old cricket coach, like, that is a skill that I had. So then analytics became a similar thing. And I get contacted by people in the data visualization world all the time going, you've changed the way that we think about this. It's not because I'm a genius. It's because I'm not very smart at these things. And so I can then frame it for other people who don't understand them as well. And that's, it's just a luck of how you are.
Yeah. How much has how much has T20 changed that, and the fact that it's become, well, partly it's become industrialized, partly it's just a slightly different way that people are thinking about the sport and all the rest of it. Like, what role do you think T20's had in maybe changing the way that people think about cricket media and cricket stories and all the rest of it?
Yeah, it's still, there aren't that many of us who use it, so I wouldn't say it's changed the media massively. TV's slowly coming around, partly because why wouldn't you want to use it in TV? It's something else put on the screen, right? Like, It makes sense to use it more. Within the game, basically what it's done is, we now know that there are quantifiable things within the game that we never really had before. So we can tell if you bat between over 6 and 11, and that's your main period of playing in the game, you're going to have a lower strike rate than everyone else.
Yeah.
And we can adjust for that algorithmically. And so it makes you look better or it makes you look as good as you actually are. And it also it means that people can't hide behind decisions the way that they used to, right?
Sure.
Like, now we have the ability to be able to go through all these sorts of things. So look, T20 cricket will take cricket from being what it is at the moment, an international sport, and turn it into a franchise sport, which is what most other sports around the world already are. But it will also, on the other side, it democratizes cricket around the world, right? Now, it's weirdly done that by making it more capitalist, but it means beforehand that we have stories of great cricketers from Fiji and Mexico and, all these other random countries. But if they didn't play test cricket, the stories just kind of faded away.
Yeah.
It mattered much more what country you came from before. Now it matters much more how good you are at cricket. And we're seeing that in women's cricket. We're seeing that in men's cricket as well. And so we have stars coming out of Nepal who have grown up watching cricket on YouTube. They didn't need to, grow up in Chennai or, London or Sydney, right? Like, they didn't need that advantage. And so that is what T20 cricket has done. So it's hard to sit there and go, it's all bad, but it is fundamentally changing what cricket has been. And some of that needed to change because cricket had a ridiculous rule that you had to be an empire, a nation to join, and it basically almost ruined the sport. And now we're going the other way and we're giving everyone a chance, which is kind of what you want your sport to be, I would have thought. But, it's not going to be national anymore. It will be franchise.
Yeah. Let's look through the other end of the telescope just quickly before we wrap up. And, you made a film, it's getting on for about 10 years ago now, called Death of a Gentleman, about Test cricket and some of the commercial decisions in part that it had made that kind of were beginning to limit its potential. What are your thoughts on it now? How have your feelings on the test arena evolved and its ability to connect in what's a very even more complex kind of media environment?
Yeah, look, the issue that we had in that film was that no one in the world was making decisions based on the fact that cricket was an incredible sport, or Test cricket was an important thing. Right? There was no one actually making those decisions out there, and so everyone was saying that Test cricket was dying, but no one was doing anything. That's what we wanted to look at. But we looked at the commercial part of it, the political side of it, the different kinds of decisions, what people still love.
Yeah.
Test cricket still moves people in a way that, is hard for any other sport to be able to do that.
Yeah.
But you have to invest a lot of time in it. And that was a problem in the 1800s, and it's still a problem today. It's always going to be Test cricket's problem, is that there's always going to be something that is going to be easier to market, or easier to certainly mass market. But when it comes down to it, it still really matters. And I still think it matters as a sport.
Yeah.
So we made that film from that point of view. Nothing has changed. Cricket is still a mess. It is more of a mess now than probably when we made the film. But when we made the film, it was there were three people basically, or two people really trying to imprint what they wanted the game to be. And now it's kind of bumbling between a few different people and various IPL owners and, politicians in India and other people who run cricket boards and cricket teams in other countries. So it is no longer the same as what it once was, which is, that sort of old gentleman's club. It's now like kind of more unruly, this is maybe more its Wild West era is maybe the best way of saying it. And, Test cricket still plays a part because people still want to watch it. And while they do, it's worth money.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot you can spin out from that, and it's probably another conversation for another podcast on another day. It's also, the history of Test cricket is something that you've written about yourself in your book, Test Cricket, the Unauthorized Biography, which came out a couple of years after the film. You've got another book out now, by which segue, The Art of Batting. What can you tell us about that?
This Art of Batting.
That one,
when I was early on in my career, I just thought you had to write books because everyone in England wrote books, especially in cricket. Everyone in cricket writes books. And so I didn't really know what to write about. So I kind of wrote about tours because they were famous tour books and they were not particularly great. And then I sort of stepped away and I was offered an opportunity to write about Test cricket. I wrote it, and then the editors kind of came in and changed what it was. It's still a very good book, but it's not the book I wanted to write. Okay. And that left a bit of a weird taste in my mouth. And then Bloomsbury came on board, and they were like, what topics you want to write about? And I was like, I've got this weird one where I want to write about the 50 greatest batters of all time. And they just really liked it. And it started off as an intellectual thing of how easy is it to work out who the 50 greatest batters of all time are. And then it ended up being more of a love poem to batting. And so I think all my books in the future will be more like that. What are the stories I am desperate to tell that make a book, rather than do I need to write a book because I haven't written a book in the last couple of years? And it's the same with documentaries. I get asked to be involved in a lot of documentaries. I've done one follow-up to Death of a Gentleman, which is a TV documentary in Australia, which will come out soon. But I haven't done that many others because there haven't been stories I've wanted to tell. It's not like there's anything special here. I just look for something that I really want to say and I say it. And I understand story and storytelling a lot better than I did when I started. So now it's very easy for me to go, oh, okay, yeah, I could spend 3 or 4 months working on that. And I know exactly what that is going to be and where I'm going to get to.
And is it a similar sort of approach or a similar sort of mindset to how you look at things day to day? Like if a story has its hooks in you, then you're going to kind of follow it and you're not going to worry about, whether it's an audience strategy or any kind of other pattern or a grand theory, Jarrod Kimber theory of how cricket works or anything like that.
Yeah, I think more or less that's kind of how I will always be from here on in. I think especially once you've had my level of success, right? Like there is an element of I must be doing something right. I'm obviously always tweaking. So it'd be ridiculous of me to pretend that I haven't changed because I've changed my career path about 83 times. But the very basis of everything comes from, if it interests me, it will probably interest another group of people. Sometimes it's 1,000, sometimes it's millions, right? I can't, that's the thing I don't think I've ever been very good at chasing. I'm sure other people are. But for me, yeah, it's just about the story. So it's the same, it's no different with an article than with a book.
Yeah, sure. What is a Jarrod Kimber route into cricket journalism look like in 2025? I mean, either from the kind of the sensibility or the stuff that, you know, might interest people, or the platforms they might use, or you know, do you find yourself wondering about that, or when you're working with kind of younger colleagues, is it something that occurs to you?
Yeah, the most important thing I would say is if you want to find out how to get into the industry, don't ask an old journalist, because whatever they did probably doesn't exist anymore, right?
Yeah.
And that is true, but there are a couple of things that sort of transcend that a little bit. And what I would say is, if you look at it, I got big on a platform that was blogging, right? And the back end of that is really Twitter as well. Those were two things that were very important, and I took more seriously than normal cricket writers did. And because of that, I got a lot of attention and forged a career. So new technology, like, you know, Jonathan Liu took a long time to come to TikTok, right? Do you know what I mean? Like, he didn't come to TikTok on day one, whereas you could already have 50,000 followers on TikTok before Jonathan Liu has worked out that all of his friends are using that app, right? And sorry, Johnny, if you're listening, but you know, so that early adapting is a really important thing. And the other one I would say is work out what people aren't doing, right? So I covered global cricket. It sounds like if I was to have told someone back when I was starting, that's what I was going to do, people would have either been like, doesn't someone already do this? Or they would have said, well, that can't work. Otherwise, someone else would have done it. All right. And I look at a lot of the people I know who made it in the industry, they covered kind of diverse things like that. And eventually, once you're in the industry, no one cares anymore, right? No one sits back and then goes, oh, wait a minute, isn't that the person who used to write about, you know, only goalkeepers from Paraguay? No, once you're good, you're good. And you're in the system, and then you can continue to go from there. So those would be the two main things I would tell. That still exists. That part of my career still exists. Everything else I did, like if you started a blog now, you look like an idiot, right? Like, I mean, you wouldn't start a blog these days. You probably start a Substack and a podcast if you were starting today, right? So there are the individual things are different, but the lessons are there. They haven't changed at all. You still basically need to be in a situation where you have a podcast or whatever the next thing a podcast is that allows you to get your information out to the world and tell your story. That's where it starts from. And then what stories can you tell that no one else has told? Or can you tell stories in a way that other people haven't told them? Those are kind of the two. And if you find both, that's the magic zone. But even just doing one or the other usually ends up to having a pretty good career.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's a lovely point, I think, on which to move on from that part of the conversation and ask the three questions that we're asking everybody on the podcast. The first of which is, do you have an origin story or something that kind of kindled your interest in sport in the first place?
No, I think I'm very different than most people. I think most people chose to like sport along the way. And I didn't realize in my family there was another option. I mean, looking back, obviously there was, and, you know, I understand how the world went, but it never even occurred to me. Sport was such a part of our life that the idea of not following or playing sport or talking about sport just didn't seem to ever come to me. So I was always there from a baby onwards. I was at my cricket club. You know, I played tennis from a very young age. I was swimming at a young age. I played golf and basketball and all these different other sports. So for me, I was always involved in sport. So it wasn't like I found sport. I was just born into it.
Okay, cool. What's your favorite piece of sport storytelling?
So you lost the questions to this interview and I had to send them back to you. And I saw this question and
behind the
it's a tough one. Yeah, behind the curtain. Sorry, I know you've just started this podcast. I'm completely ruining your reputation already. But I think probably David Renwick's King of the World on Muhammad Ali. It's sort of, I suppose it's mostly about the Sonny Liston fights, isn't it? But it's kind of the period before Sonny Liston and after Sonny Liston as well. But it's about America and it's about culture. It's not. I felt like, and I read it when I was quite young, and I've reread it a couple of times since. I feel like I learned a lot about everything from reading that book, not just about boxing, not just about Muhammad Ali and Sonny Liston, but about where America was in the world at that time, probably the birthplace of sports capitalism, I suppose, as well. It's not really the birthplace, but maybe when it gets when it goes to another degree anyway. So yeah, I think that's probably it. Weirdly enough, there's probably the other thing that really had a huge impact on me as a child was When We Were Kings, which is another Muhammad Ali thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think partly it's because Muhammad Ali has inspired so many great writers and artists to cover him. As much as I'm fascinated with Muhammad Ali, I'm fascinated with many different things. So yeah, I think those would be the ones that really have spoken the most to me as a storyteller, and probably came along at a very good time.
Sure.
But I'm also a film fan, so there were lots of different films along the way. So I know it might sound weird, but even something like, White Men Can't Jump was a really important thing. And, obviously Any Given Sunday was another one. Like all those sorts of things sort of came together. But yeah, certainly the two Muhammad Ali projects are probably the ones that had the biggest impact on me. But you've got to remember that I wasn't supposed to be a sports writer. I was trying to write movie scripts.
Right.
And so for me, the sport was always just something I did as a hobby and because I liked it. And it accidentally became a career on my way to, writing sitcom pilot scripts in America.
Wow, that's quite a journey. I don't know how many other people will have been on the same one.
Hopefully no one, because it's been bloody long and confusing. I can tell you that.
With that in mind, maybe what's a sports story you'd like to tell or see somebody else tell?
I think that the world's changed so much that there's just so many sports stories out there that I probably don't even really know about. I think there's already been some great stuff done on transgender sports and also probably athletes with sort of intersex people. I think that's a really, really interesting one that I want to see more on that on the other side. And I know we've seen some great stuff on it already. Those stories are really interesting. I think for me, I have a list of about ridiculous amount of projects that I want to get to. I think most of them I still want to do, so I don't want to kind of give them away. Just only because I don't mind if someone else writes them before me if they find them naturally, but I'd be heartbroken if they found if they found some of these. But I think for me, the big thing is that there's a whole generation of athletes who are about to die around the world. And I've been thinking about this more and more of recent times of just how many professional athletes in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s who have incredible stories that we just don't know anything about. And it was partly because there was only a couple of newspapers at the time, or they weren't famous enough, so we didn't think they were interesting, or they were interesting, but we missed them somehow.
Yeah.
And I think that I really hope there's a lot of people going out there for individual sports trying to tell the stories of all these people, because I would hate to think that so many of them are going to pass away and we don't know how important they were to their sport or their culture, whatever that may be. And so, when I was writing The Art of Batting, it was something I really noticed of just how few people, there were so many people who batted with guys like Dennis Compton and Peter May and Len Hutton and, all these sorts of players.
Yeah.
But we hadn't, because of the era that they played in, we hadn't got their stories on what these great players were like, or their own individual stories. And so that was the big thing for me, is I just think there's a whole generation of, probably after World War II is the first sort of start of professional sport, right? And though that generation of athletes from 1950 through to 1980s are just dying, and because the sports world wasn't as dynamic as it is now, not as many people writing or making content or radio interviews or whatever that may be, we've lost a lot of that. So I think that for me, it's just going back and telling all the stories of the great athletes and the average athletes and the interesting athletes, right? Is something that sports should be doing. So those are the great stories that I think if you go out and you talk to old athletes, you're just going to find them. And so I'm certainly not going to give away any of my gold material here, but there's some big stories that I want to write that I am desperate to tell. But I don't think that should stop anyone else going out there. There's so many stories out there that just have not been covered yet. We've barely even started talking about women's sport correctly. And, there are so many things in sort of the smaller countries as well that needs to be told. I'm talking about cricket here, but I'm talking about all sports. There's so many great stories that outside the English-speaking world that I think have really been overlooked at times as well. We're never going to struggle for stories.
Sure. Great note to finish on. Great challenge to everyone who's involved in sport and storytelling. And it's been great fun talking to you, Jarrod. Thanks so much for your time. Outlines is an original production from 2640.